O'clock on Monday, December 7th, 2020. I'm going to call this meeting to order the Podiatry Advisory Board of TDLR. Just some kind of ground rules. I'm sure everybody's had some experience with using these web-based meetings before, but if you're not talking, the mute button helps with some reverb and keep everybody's voices clear. When you say something, because there's a little bit of video lag, it's always better if you start your statement by saying your name. Just sometimes the video is a little lag, so you can't just look and see whose mouth is moving. So that's been at least my experience with that. But we'll get started with a roll call, and as well as before we do that, I'll introduce our new public members. Public members are something we are finally happy to have. We've been short since sunset, I guess. I think that would be right. So welcome. We're glad to have you. Ms. Wyndham, Ms. Hernandez, and Mr. Rosas. And thank you for giving of all your time, because you will absolutely positively not get paid back in any way for doing it. So go ahead, Delia, if you want to call the roll.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sirenia Terrazas. Here. Yvette Hernandez.
Here.
Nancy Carroll Wyndham. Here. Dr. Renee Peach.
Here.
Dr. Joe Martin.
Here.
Dr. Michael Lunsford.
Here.
Dr. Corey Brown is absent. Dr. Leslie Campbell. Dr. Campbell. Okay. And Dr. Motley.
Here. And I don't see Leslie's name popping up. She was. Oh, there you are. Okay.
I see her. Yeah. We do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Agenda item C is advisory board member training. And Ms. Winston, you like to carry that?
Good morning, advisory board members. Mary Winston, TDLR. I feel almost redundant in giving this training based on comments Dr. Motley just made of the number of trainings that he has to currently do, and you all do in your professions. But we've done 30 of these. We've seen some things, we haven't seen some things, and just to keep it running smoothly, there are a couple of things that I just kind of give you a little few tips so the public will know what's going on. The meeting is being conducted by video conference, and the public is watching via live stream. Any persons who signed up to make public comment will have a chance to do so later in the meeting. It is also being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. Here's some tips so that we can have a successful meeting. Please keep your microphones muted until you'd like to speak. Please put all phones on silent and turn off any other sources of noise in your workplace. If at all possible, please avoid fiddling around and stay on camera. State your name before you begin speaking. Raise your hand if you would like to speak visibly. There's a raise hand feature in many of these platforms that we use for public meetings, but because our chairperson, Dr. Motley, is running this meeting, our folks in the background helping us, Mr. Fickle and Mr. Harris, are handling multiple things. That particular feature has been disabled for this meeting, and we're just going to do it elementary school style. Raise your hand and someone will see you and the chairman will acknowledge you. Roll call will be conducted by, the active vote, as we just saw Miss Luna do. She'll call your name and get your vote. If you have any problems connecting during the meeting, try to let the presiding officer know. We do have staff, as I said, working in the background to, ensure connectivity. Stay on camera during the meeting, even if you aren't speaking. And if you need a recess, I'm sure Dr. Motley will oblige you. Raise your hand, let him know your request, and he can pause the meeting. If you do get inadvertently disconnected from the meeting, rejoin using the same link that you used to initially join in the meeting. We've now conducted, as I said, about 30 of these. And using the new medium, we've had blips, a few awkward moments. No worries, we deal with them in real time, and we take a small recess if needed. These things are anticipated, and it's okay. We adjust. we go through the agenda items, and we take care of everything we need to act on. If at all possible, it looks like everyone is in one position, but as folks have gotten comfortable with these virtual meetings, there have been folks who drive and do their dailies, not necessarily in this meeting, but there have been people who've done their grocery shopping while doing a public meeting. Again, not here at TDLR, but in some of the meetings, please remember that you are on camera, and what you would do in that meeting room is what we want to do on camera. And I know I don't have that problem here, but I just had to say it because I've said it to everyone else. Again, thank you so much for making yourselves available, and I look forward to a successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Winston. It's always a good review of that. It seems kind of redundant, but we'll all mess up again at some point in time. As far as the new board member training with review of open meetings, the Administrative Procedure Act and Public Information Act, Alex, you want to help us out?
Absolutely. Good morning, board members. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Phipps. I'm the Assistant General Counsel assigned to work with the podiatry program. And I look forward to meeting all of you in person at some point, of course, but here we are virtually, so hopefully this will suffice for now, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions about the program. I'm going to give a presentation on open government now. It'll contain a little overview that's also contained in your packets. You do all have handouts that are related to these open government statutes. But again, this is a little training just to make sure you're all up to speed on all the requirements here in the state of Texas. I'm going to share my screen, so if there is any difficulty seeing what I'm presenting or hearing me while I'm speaking, feel free to interrupt me and let me know. Obviously, it's not as easy for me to know whether or not you can hear me since we are here virtually. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation. So let me know if you can't see this. And obviously, this is a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to be clicking through the slides. If anytime you can hear me, please let me know, and I will stop and back up. So today we're going to do the overview of the open government provisions of Texas statutes. We're going to cover 3 different statutes: the Open Meetings Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the Public Information Act. First, we'll do the Open Meetings Act. The purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to ensure open and transparent government. And the way it goes about doing that is requiring meetings of governmental bodies like this advisory board to be open to the public and preceded by public notice of the time, place, and subject matter of the meeting. Provisions of the Act are mandatory and they're liberally construed in favor of open government. First concept you need to be aware of is the quorum. We did have our little calculation of a quorum there at the roll call. You do have a good illustration of this in the minutes. At our last meeting, we did not have 5 members until part of the way through the meeting, so we couldn't take any official action. You need to reach a quorum, which is a majority of the members of the board as set by statute, before you can take an official action. If you have less than a quorum, you can have discussion, but you cannot take any official action like adopting. Deliberation is the next concept you need to be aware of. Deliberation is communication between the board members and another person concerning an issue within the jurisdiction of the governmental body. So it's important to remember here, this is not just verbal communication, it's also written communication like texts and emails. Third concept is a meeting. So the term of the meeting is any time a quorum of a governmental body engages in deliberation regarding the business or a policy that the advisory board has jurisdiction over. So that's important, anytime, not just when we've officially noticed the meeting here at TDLR. Finally, we'll talk about notice. Advance written notice of the date, time, place, and subject matter of each meeting is required by the Open Meetings Act. We here at the department prepare this in an agenda. We file it with the Secretary of State. You can go and look that up today if you'd like to. We cannot engage in any discussions about a subject matter not on the agenda. So we do have a question that comes up very frequently is, what if all of us are at a continuing medical education or something like that, where multiple members are present have we engaged in an open meeting? Are we violating the Open Meetings Act? Well, the answer to that is no. If you're not engaging in discussion, that is your subject matter. So you're free to engage in conversations about the weather, about the event, anything that's not your official business. But if you do begin talking about, for example, the rule that we're about to propose, you would be violating the Open Meetings Act. So that's something important to keep in mind. Always be aware of any situation where you may be around a quorum. Don't engage in substantive communications relating to board business anytime a quorum may be involved. And beware the walking quorum. So the walking quorum occurs when fewer than a quorum of members engage in discussion about official business, and then you communicate that to other members. This can happen anyway, by email, by text, by phone call. You want to make sure that you're aware that you can easily reach a walking quorum, or others that you've spoken to can reach a walking quorum, even if there's not a quorum present at that time. I'll give you an example here, just so you can conceptualize what might happen. Say two members exchange phone calls and research about an upcoming rule change, and they discuss the issue, but they haven't reached a quorum because there's only two of them. However, one of the members subsequently forwards that exchange to someone else. If you reach a quorum, you've engaged in a walking quorum by exchanging these discussions by email or by text or however else you've exchanged them, even though you never had 5 members present in the same room. These can occur during conference calls, video conferences, probably not hallway discussions anytime soon, but of course in the future when we are having in-person meetings, or when you're meeting at a convention or something like that. You also should be aware that newer social media technologies like Twitter and Facebook may present possibilities for this, so please be aware of that and don't engage in official business on Facebook. And we encourage you not to meet in small groups, not to send emails or text messages, or create posts on social media about the official business of the board. And if you are ever asking about official business of the board, make sure you are not polling or engaging in any kind of behavior that may reach a walking quorum. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Give you guidelines for open sessions of the meeting. You are limited to the specific items on the agenda. When the members of the public do speak in public comments, they may speak about anything that's on their mind, anything that they want to bring to the attention of the board. It's important to keep in mind that the only action you can take on an item that is not on the agenda is to propose it for a future meeting. So that's an important concept. If someone brings to your attention something that justifies a rulemaking or justifies an amendment, even though it may be important and it may be something you want to take up in the future, you cannot act on it at the meeting where that was discussed by the public commenter because it's not on the agenda. It has to be proposed for a future meeting. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. Here are some guidelines for open sessions. Limit your discussions to the specific agenda items that we've already identified. Avoid allowing discussions to wander into areas that may not have been noticed. Don't respond or discuss issues that are raised during the public comments but are not on the agenda. And feel free to identify items for future agenda items with us here on TDLR staff. We're happy to take care of that and make sure it gets on the next agenda. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here, and this is the scary part of the presentation, there are civil and criminal penalties for violations of the Open Meetings Act. The civil penalties involve voiding or stopping the actions of the board that violated the Open Meetings Act. So for example, if we were to violate the Open Meetings Act in the adoption of a rule, Travis County District Court may void that rule, which means it would not be enforceable. So we need to make sure that we do not take any actions that violate the Open Meetings Act because they may be reversed in the future. Additionally, there are criminal penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act. So if you already engage in a walking quorum or knowingly participate in a closed meeting, you may be subject to misdemeanor criminal penalties. And obviously, none of us want you to be subject to criminal penalties. So please keep that in mind. Best practices to avoid all of that: avoid any communication that may involve a quorum of the board or even present a possible walking quorum. And during open meetings, confine your discussion to items specifically on the agenda. Here are some resources. These are also in your packet, so you don't need to note down all of these links. But our phone number is there as well if you do have any questions. And feel free to review these, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or anyone else in the department. So now we'll cover the Administrative Procedure Act. I'm going to refer to this as the APA just to make it easier. The purpose of the APA is to establish minimum standards of uniform practice and procedures for state agencies and provide for public participation and transparency during the rulemaking process. A rule, and this is an important definition because this is what guides our actions under the APA, is a statement of general applicability made by a state agency that implements, interprets, or prescribes law or policy, or describes the procedure or practice requirements of a state agency. There are some exclusions. Obviously, the internal management or organization of a state agency that does not affect private rights or procedures is not considered a rule. But a rule does include a new rule, an amendment to an existing rule, or the repeal of an existing rule. And you'll see that later today when we discuss the repeal of the penalty matrix. Even though we are removing a rule, for purposes of the APA, it's still treated as a rulemaking. So there are many sources for rulemaking: legislative changes. We have advisory board suggestions, like those that you may bring to us. We have TDLR staff, four-year rule review, which we'll discuss here in a second, and a rule petition, which we'll also discuss here in a minute. Rule petition can be brought by any interested person. So for the purposes of the APA, an interested person is someone in Texas, a resident, a business entity, a governmental subdivision, or a public or private organization. And then here is the rulemaking process. I know this is a large chart. I will give you a quick overview of this, but feel free to ask me if you're unclear about any of these steps. We start with the idea of drafting the rule, putting it together. We move forward to internal review and analysis. This is all occurring within TDLR. We allow the governor's office to review that. And then we bring that draft to you. And that's today we will have a draft for you. So this is a good example. We will be discussing a rule that we've drafted. And this is the step we are at right now, the first blue box. After the advisory board discusses it, we'll propose those rules in the Texas Register. They'll be open for a 30-day public comment period, which means the public can take a look and send us their thoughts and their issues with the proposed rule. We'll review those comments, then we'll bring it back to you again for a second advisory board meeting, where we may discuss the changes that are justified by the public comments, or we may respond to those public comments and say, well, we're not going to make any changes because they're not relevant or they aren't justified in some way. After that second advisory board meeting, the proposed rules will be adopted at a commission meeting, and then they will be published in the Texas Register. And then finally, we will reach the effective date of the rules. A shorter process is the rule review process. This is what I mentioned earlier. The APA requires every rule to be reviewed on a 4-year schedule. And that is a requirement to ensure that rules that are no longer justified or needed are removed from the Texas Administrative Code. So the steps would be to publish an intent to review. We will review chapter by chapter what rules would be subject to the rule review process. Public can provide us comments, just like in the previous rulemaking process. General Counsel Division reviews those comments and will make a recommendation to the commission whether or not they should readopt it. Then the commission reviews those and may readopt the rules or may decide to repeal them. Obviously, if there is a change or a repeal or something like that that occurs to the chapter, your advisory board will be involved, and we'll bring that to you and explain the process when it happens. So here are some resources for rulemaking. And again, all these are in your packet. And if you review these and you have any questions, definitely reach out to anyone in the department. I'm happy to discuss this with you and walk you through any questions you may have about rulemaking. So the final act we'll be talking about is the Public Information Act. Normally we refer to this as open records. That's probably what you've heard this called, but Public Information Act is the act here in Texas that creates that concept. It's intended to allow access to information about government agencies. This makes all documents, records, and other information relating to your official business open to the public, with some exceptions. And obviously those exceptions are things that we will determine here in the department if we do receive a request. But it can be any electronic communication on any device if it is in connection with your official business. So that's an important note. If you do get a text about official business or an email to your personal email or your personal phone, please keep in mind that could still be subject to the Public Information Act. It will be construed liberally in favor of granting requests for the information. So if you do receive something that you think is a request, especially if it's a written request, so that's an important note, it must be written. So if someone calls you on the phone, this would not apply. But if you do get an email, you get a letter at your office, something like that, if it looks like it's a request, please forward that to us and we will help you determine whether or not it needs to be responded to. If you do receive a request from us about information, please respond to that as soon as you can. Because the Public Information Act has a very specific timeline for response. We need to work within 10 business days to determine what the request is and if we can respond to it. We can't ask why someone wants those records. We can only ask for clarifications about what they're asking for. So there is a clock that's ticking very quickly when we receive a request, and that's why we would ask that you assist us if you do get any requests from us at all. So there are some common exceptions. Date of birth, email addresses, some educational stuff, public health information, personal health information under HIPAA and the Texas Medical Records Privacy Act. Things that would need to be redacted, and the agency will handle redacting that. So if you do have any questions about what may be included in an open records request, we're happy to walk you through the exceptions that would apply. And here are some other resources. I'm sure all of you have watched the helpful video that the Attorney General's office has put together. But if you have any questions, again, feel free to contact us. And I'd also point out that there's our email address, open.records@tdlr. So if you do receive a request, or if you want to ask a question or make a request, that would be where you'd want to send it. So if you have any questions, let me know. You have been trained, and you'll hear from me more shortly.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Phipps. That's a pretty succinct thing with a lot of good information. And there's just remember the downside of violating any of those is pretty substantial. So everybody wants to hit you up at meetings for different topics, and it's just a good one to avoid. We got an old hat crew, most of us that are at conferences, so we avoid that pretty easily. I usually blame Dr. Lunsford for something and walk off. So that's the way it works easiest. But thanks for doing that. Agenda item E is approval of the minutes from March 9, 2020 meeting. Those minutes are in your packet, and if everyone has reviewed that, I would take a motion to approve those minutes. I see.
Motion to approve.
All right, in a second.
I second. Joe Mark.
Okay. All in favor, aye. Or raise your hand, I guess.
Aye.
Aye.
Good. Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you. Agenda item E. Agenda item F is public comment. We did not receive any public comments. So we'll move, Ms. Winston, it's fine to move to G, correct? Mute button.
That is correct. I was fighting with my mute button. Yes, we're good. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so it's agenda item G, our staff reports. We'll start with licensing division, Ms. Hernandez.
Good morning, board members. My name is Laura Hernandez. I supplied the licensing staff report. Right now, my team is currently working from home. We do have one person in office daily to help upload applications, renewals, anything like that that we need to keep processing. And it's been a seamless process so we can keep processing all paperwork. The statistics I provided were for fiscal year 2020. At the time of the report, the first quarter for this new fiscal year wasn't available to me. But you see the statistics for the doctor of pediatric medicine and then also for the radiological technicians. And if anybody has any questions on the statistics or anything else, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. If no questions from the group, we'll move to number 2 under that. Were there any questions? Sorry. Okay. Sometimes there's a delay. I don't want to step on anyone, so you may have to get louder if I step on you. Customer service. Oh, do you want to show those? Okay. We're going to share that and go. Okay, great. Customer service division, Ms. Rush.
Hi, good morning, board members. This is Jacqueline Rush from Customer Service. Good to be here with you this morning. So we have our statistics in front of you showing how many calls and emails we responded for podiatry within our division. We are all working from home in the middle of March. We got a notice that we would begin working from home, and within that afternoon, we were all doing that, and we've been doing that since. The numbers before you are showing the typical spike that happens in October. At the time that I turned in this report, we didn't have October numbers yet, but this past October, we received 130 calls and 10 emails. Can I answer any questions on the kind of calls or emails that we're receiving?
I assume most have to do with renewals or probably something linked to DEA renewals or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of application instructions, renewal requirements, assisting doctors and rad techs in navigating the website and the general public in finding laws and rules. We had a lot of calls with folks that were trying to understand the new human trafficking course requirement. And let's see if there's anything else. Anybody getting stuck along the way, if their application got stuck because they were missing a requirement or for some other reason, we helped coordinate care from other divisions so that we could see what was going on with their application and hopefully keep it moving. So those kind of calls.
Do you remember if there were any that were moving from out of state to in state and having any troubles kind of navigating our site or anything?
So we often do have people calling from out of state, and they just sort of want reassurance. Um, most really all the information that they're needing is on the website and on the form. But it's not uncommon for this industry and others, for folks that are just moving in, who find that there might be some small differences or things look a little different. They just want to be sure that they're set up correctly from the get-go. So we're happy to review with folks just to make sure that they feel good about the application they're sending in.
Okay, great. Any questions from Ms. Rush?
I have a question. Joe Martin, Dr. Martin. Were there many complaints or questions about navigating the training site for sex trafficking? Did you have any questions about that? I'll hang up now.
Yes, sir, we did. And I really, I want to thank Hemet Megan. He actually took the course early on and noted some of the areas where customers would probably have, some challenges in trying to figure out what was going on. Um, we were able to work with him, with our Office of Strategic Communication, and with Regulatory Program Management to actually create a document with instructions to put together an email template that we can send customers saying, hey, if you're having any trouble navigating this website, here is, some tips. Here are some things that you should know while you're filling it out. I think since then, that agency has provided their own guide, but at the time that didn't exist. So we did create that to try to give people a little bit of help because a lot of folks did find it confusing to register. Not with the course. I want to make sure that I make that clear. There were a lot of folks gave feedback that the registration process for the course was difficult to understand. So that was what we were giving a little bit of help with.
Was that kind of your experience, Dr. Martin, kind of navigating to the portion of the education?
Right. It was navigating to it. The course content was fine once you got to it, and then printing the certificate, there was a little trick to that, but mostly it was getting started was the problem. And hopefully that's been addressed.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, and I know that sounds like something Hemet would tackle and make easier for the rest of us. But Steve and I had to call a couple of people. I think it may be more of a user error and kind of familiarity with internet in general. I
Yeah.
think probably the biggest challenge that Steve had to deal with too. So thanks for everybody's work on that. A little change, nobody likes change, but necessary, and we did it. So good job. Anything else for Ms. Rush? Okay, agenda item G3 then, Enforcement Division, Ms. Hurtado.
Good morning, board members. My name is Jessica Hurtado, and I'm a prosecutor in the Enforcement Division, and I'll be giving the staff report today. First, we want to give you some personnel updates. On February 15th, Debbie Hawkins was promoted to Legal Assistant Supervisor, and Debbie has worked for TDLR for 8 years as a legal assistant in the Enforcement Division. On March 1, John Medlock was promoted to Chief Prosecutor. John has worked for TDLR for 7 years, previously serving as a prosecutor and senior prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. On May 1st, Trevor Thielen was promoted to senior prosecutor to replace John's previous position. Trevor has worked for TDLR for 9 years as a prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. On August 31st, Investigations Manager Greg Dotson retired after 22 years of service with TDLR. Greg oversaw the investigations section, which includes our 42 investigators. At the time of the report, the position had been posted to the department's website. As of now, someone has been offered the position and they've accepted, and they're going to be beginning in January. On August 31st, Prosecution Legal Assistant Manager Daryl Kuntz retired after 18 years of service with TDLR. And Daryl oversaw the prosecution legal assistance section, which includes 33 legal assistants and administrative assistants. On August 31st, Senior Investigator Esmer Arguello retired after 21 years of service with TDLR. And on October 1st, Jackie Revilla was promoted to Prosecution Legal Assistant Manager to fill the vacancy created by Daryl's retirement. Jackie has worked for TDLR for 18 years, and she was previously a legal assistant supervisor. On November 30, Prosecutor Ken Sharp retired after 7 years of service with TDLR. Ken was previously on the TOW team before he joined the criminal history team, where he reviewed licensees and applicants' criminal records. Okay, on the second page, you can see our statistics for fiscal year 2020. You'll see that there were 61 cases opened and 73 cases closed, which is good to see that more cases were closed than opened. The average time to close is about 351 days. Approximately 30% of cases are being resolved within 6 months, and about 6.8% are resulting in disciplinary action. Right now, we have 52 cases pending. Down in the middle, you'll see the sources of cases open for fiscal year 2020. The vast majority of the complaints are the consumer complaints coming from the public. They make up 84%. 6% of the complaints were opened by department staff, and 10% of the cases were opened based on a respondent or applicant's criminal history. And then at the bottom, you can see case outcomes. There was 1 commission order, 8 agreed orders assessing penalties totaling $12,375, all of which have been collected. There was one order denying or revoking a license, and you'll see that 64 cases were resolved informally. On page 3, you've got the violations at opening. These is simply the violation that's alleged at the opening of the case, and so it may not match up with what actually is the outcome of the case. But you'll see that 34 cases were opened alleging gross negligence or malpractice, 17 cases opened alleging unprofessional or unethical conduct, 6 cases were opened to examine criminal history, 4 were open to deal with fraud or deceit in services provided, 2 dealt with false or misleading advertising, and then there was 1 case opened each for a continuing medical education violation, an unlicensed practicing, and a sexual misconduct allegation. And then you'll see below that, you've got the top violations resulting in disciplinary action. 3 cases were based on a fraud or deceit in services provided violation. 3 dealt with unprofessional or unethical conduct. 2 dealt with gross negligence or malpractice. 1 was based on lacking honesty, trustworthiness, or integrity. And 1 was based on a criminal history. And finally, we have the case highlights. The first cases involved Dr. Jensen. An agreed order was entered on October 3rd of 2019, imposing a $3,000 fine for 3 instances of failing to keep complete records, and that has been paid in full. The second case, Dr. Flumen, there was an agreed order entered on January 16 of 2020, imposing a penalty of $2,625 for respondent treating a patient and failing to provide appropriate post-surgical wound care. Respondent failed to practice podiatry in an acceptable manner, and that penalty has been paid in full. On the last page, we have Dr. Lar. There was an agreed order entered on July 8 of 2020, imposing a penalty of $2,250 when respondent performed surgery on the patient's left foot when the condition requiring surgery and consent forms were for surgery to be performed on the patient's right foot. And that penalty has been paid in full. And the last case, Dr. Maslos, there were 3 cases that were settled by an agreed order on July 14 of 2020, imposing a penalty of $4,500 for 3 violations of billing for improper, unreasonable, or unnecessary services and engaging in grossly unprofessional or dishonorable conduct that is likely to deceive or defraud the public. And that penalty has been paid in full. And so that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, if no questions, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Hurtado? I know I have a couple, just after.
Yeah, Travis,
Go ahead.
Joe Martin. Yeah, Mr. Hurtado, I had a question about how many cases proceed after review from, after chart review, and what the percentage is that proceed with the recommendations of the reviewer.
That is a great question. I don't have that information, but I can certainly get it for you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in kind of looking at that. I suspect it's pretty straightforward, but I'd be interested in looking at those numbers.
Certainly, we can do that.
Thank you.
Other question I had, a couple here. Number one, we had number of cases open and number of cases closed, but how many are currently open? Do you have that information?
Yes, there's currently 52 open, and they may be either assigned to the investigator for investigation or with the attorney. It's not broken down that way.
Okay, so grand total of everything y'all have open right now is 52.
That's right.
That's fantastic. Okay, so that was one of my questions. The other one, so, and I don't know if this is COVID related or whatever the variable may be here, but I had expected to see our time to close go down. So at our last sunset, that was a big part that they did not find satisfactory, was our time to make a disposition on a complaint. And the 351, I don't know if that's like playing catch up from some prior or if it's because of COVID, but do you anticipate that number getting low? Is there one that's like 700 days that's throwing the whole average off, or what? Kind of drill down those numbers if you have that information.
Yeah, I would hate to speculate as to why that is. I have some ideas, but I don't have any data right now to tell you for sure. So I would have to look at that. I suspect it's a combination of all those factors, but yes, I would expect that to be going down going forward.
Okay.
But we
And
can look into that.
this is Mary Winston, TDLR. And Jessica, I'm sure, I know you do have probably some ideas, but we do have some management analysts, and we can kind of take a deep dive into that from Chris and Ms. Perez to see if we can kind of get you some data for that. Not sure what is the reason offhand, even though we could speculate, but I'll bet we have some data points that we can get back to you. So we just have to get a little research.
Fantastic. And we're still using a penalty matrix, I assume, Ms. Hurtado? Yes, I see Mary shaking. Okay. And then my last question was another thing that Sunset had and was, kind of the informals and agreed orders versus going to SOA. And so I didn't see any of those cases had gone to SOA. And the reason I bring it up is because that was something that Sunset had really seemed to find important.
I'm not sure. Am I still seeing Jessica? She was having some connectivity issues, but Chairman Motley, that is at TDLR. I did not see any of those that actually went to SOA, but some of the issues that she initially had dealt with process. And yes, things were maybe more informal, but because this board has voted on a process as far as penalty matrix and the criminal matrix and things like that, it follows a more standard process. So if something is to go to SOA, then it is not sort of happenstance. It goes by that process, and there's an opportunity to have an informal settlement, and it's not per case, it's overall.
Okay.
So we are following, and we'll keep you abreast if anything. I have to tell you, though there have been some violations, this collection with this program with podiatrists is outstanding. We don't have penalty jumpers, shall we say. It looks like everyone stands up, says, hey, I made a mistake, pays their penalty, and attempts to move forward in their profession.
Great. Well, that's the purpose of the matrix, And so I think if we get that data, drill down the data about time to close, the number of cases open is really a low number. And then Dr. Martin's question and kind of about what do we do with the investigator's recommendations?
We
from
have
there.
both of those noted, and I think Jessica may have accidentally dropped off. Just connectivity she had, I call it the cone of death that was over her screen, that warning cone, but she'll probably hop back in. But we'll get that for you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That's a lot of data, and that's a really an important one, just based on the history of where this board has been and where we want to be and what's going from there. Next one is any other questions? I'm sorry, before I go on with number 3 there, that was the enforcement division. Okay. Number 4, education examination division, Ms. Arma.
Good morning, Chairman, Advisory Board members. My name is Rebecca Armas, and I'm with the Education and Examination Division. I just want to go over a few things with you this morning. As you see, we closed out fiscal year 2020 with a 71% pass rate for the jurisprudence examination. We do have some first quarter statistics. Right now, we're hovering at about 44%. And compared to last fiscal year, we have a little bit more attempts at the examination. So that's another reason why you can see the difference between the two. Another thing is that the exam sites were shut down for a little while between March, and they didn't open up until May. So we've got a little bit of catching up to do. They're not open at a full capacity. They're still open at a limited basis to, make sure we have proper social distancing and everybody stays safe. So you're going to see the numbers fluctuate between now until we're able to, have these PSI exam sites open at full capacity. It still remains the same where your candidates are able to test anywhere there is a PSI location. They just need to contact PSI once they're made eligible and set up that examination. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on this morning is something that you discussed during the customer service report. I wanted to touch on the fact that TDLR has created a human trafficking prevention training for health professions webpage. So there they can, anyone in the health professions can click on there to help kind of get FAQs, helpful hints to navigate this process so that it is, more seamless and less of a headache trying to log in and navigate everything. We've kind of provided that information there for you. The email went out on August 20th to kind of give everybody a little bit of help. But we recommend that if you have any questions, visit our website, go on to that human trafficking prevention page, and they will be able to navigate that. Again, one other thing that I touched on earlier was the examination impact. Like I said, PSI is not operating at full capacity in order to have great social distancing and keep everyone safe. We are working with them to open up some additional sites. We're using a third party. They're using a third party examination vendor for some of our examinees to be able to go and take the exam without any wait. We're doing the best we can. However, we all know that if somebody calls today trying to test tomorrow, there may be some challenges. So just to please allow enough time when they want to take that examination. So as soon as they know that they're made eligible, contact PSI. They can go online and register, and we can get them taken care of as soon as possible. And at this time, this concludes my report. I am happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Great. Any questions regarding education examination?
I have a question. Renee Peach. When it comes to the failure, and I don't remember this, so when someone fails, can they immediately just reapply to take it again, or is there a waiting period for them?
They can contact PSI the next day and schedule their retake.
Is there any number of retakes they're allowed to take? And then if, like, let's say they take 4 or 5 before they pass, are they flagged by the site as someone to watch, or no?
No.
Okay.
Now there are parameters that PSI does have in place to target people that could be in there just for what we call banking questions. We have all of that exam security in place to make sure that if they're not taking the full time, everything is audio and video recorded. We can pull video, watch video. The psychometricians also look at the statistics, check on how long if someone takes to take the examination to make sure they're taking their full time. There's a lot of things that are in place to secure these examinations. And if there are things like that, then we do get that report. We'll get something that says, hey, this is a little out of the ordinary. But as a everyday thing, we've got folks in some of our other professions that they take it as many times as needed in order to pass.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Question, Dr. Campbell, Leslie Campbell, do you have any statistics based on failure rate as to whether these folks are coming from out of state versus in state? That's the first question. And the testing centers, is it Prometric that you're using, or is there a different facility that the testing sites are being coordinated through?
No, TDLR is contracted with PSI. PSI is our third-party examination vendor. And at this point, we don't have that information, but I can certainly look into researching to see if I can get with licensing if it's, where they can flag that information and we can do a little bit of research and I can get back to you on that.
It's just a point of interest, only from the standpoint that folks that have been in Texas might have a little bit more information if they've attended conferences here and have had relationships with other podiatrists in Texas. But thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks for your
Sure.
time.
Sorry, the light just went out in here. One of the things I did want to also point out is that also does happen in some of our other professions where they come from out of state and they're not quite familiar with the Texas laws and rules, and they just gung-ho want to try to take our examination without really studying it. And that's how we notice also some of the pass rates aren't as great. But I can certainly look at that information for you.
I have a question, Sirenia Terrazas, and just kind of piggybacking on a previous question, do you have a metric as to how many kind of the average number of times applicants take the exam and pass? Like, do we have most people pass it the first time? Is it 2 or 3 times? Do you have that metric?
I don't have that handy, but I do have access to that. I can certainly request that from our exam vendor and provide that to you to where, and usually, and for proper psychometrics, it's usually just first time and repeater. They don't go on past that, just because the metrics of an examination are usually first time versus repeater. But there are those that need, sometimes do have additional, but it's very rare.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, comments, or anything from Ms. Armas? All right, that was G4, G5 Regulatory Program Management Division. Steve?
Hi, everybody. Steve Eaker, TDLR RPM. I want to give you the Regulatory Program Management Staff Report. First, we'll start with the personnel. Our section currently has 2 vacancies. BB Perez resigned this past the end of August, and Marinella LaFleur retired on October 31st. They both worked in the barbering, cosmetology, and massage therapy programs, and we will miss them and wish them well. Those are huge programs. Currently, RPM's been working on a lot of stuff. We have been working with the pharmacy board to facilitate registration and educate podiatrists about the prescription monitoring program requirements. As of March 1st, 2020, podiatrists are required to query the PMP prior to prescribing opioids, benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and carisoprodol. The latest statistical information is in your packet. There are currently 768 podiatrists registered, which is a little over 68%. This is an increase of 12% or 115 podiatrists since March. This program is important. It requires podiatrists to check this system to see if people are hopping from doctor shopping from doctor to doctor to get more scheduled medicines that they can abuse or sell. We've also been working with the Standard of Care Work Group, the Office of General Counsel, and other departments to draft rules regarding telehealth and disaster response, respond to COVID-related inquiries, and the acceptability of live interactive CME courses, which is important. We've been working with the Standard of Care Work Group communication on various communication regarding waivers for e-prescribing of controlled substances, and that will be as part of our rule packet today. And we've been working along with all the other divisions to implement House Bill 2059, which is the human trafficking bill. This is required in order to renew their license. This new training requirement went into effect this September, and it's not a one-time training requirement, and it has to be taken with every renewal period. We've been working closely with HHSC to help licensees access and complete this training. We also are very glad to report that HHSC has approved some more courses, and all approved courses are, as others have said, posted on the HHSC webpage, and we have links to their webpage on our program pages. So the problems that with that one course and getting registered, hopefully with these other options, it might be an easier registration process. Staff have been involved in the development of a new license system that has been named the Texas Licensing System. This new system will be implemented in phases and eventually used by all TDLR programs. This will bring all of our disparate licensing programs together for a little bit easier use and efficiency. I'm working with Stuart Myrick at the Texas Division of Emergency Management's State Operations Center, or the SOC, as the TDLR liaison and health profession subject matter expert in support of the state's COVID-19 pandemic response. And we're fulfilling these duties remotely in addition to our other job duties, and which are also done remotely from our homes. In terms of outreach, Hemant and I attended meetings of the Federation of State Podiatric Medical Examiners on March 23rd and September 16th, where there was discussion regarding continuing medical education and the clinical skills patient encounter exam in response to COVID-19 restrictions. The CSP exam is an in-person exam that is only offered in one location. We also contributed an article, and we'll talk about that a little bit more further down the road in this meeting. We also contributed an article to their third quarter newsletter that provided an overview of the Texas Podiatry program. And then we produce we've also helped produce the TDLR Health Monitor, and that was distributed and sent out in October. In this edition, we shared that the good news that internet live activities are alive for continuing medical education. And this latest issue can be found on our program webpage, and links to previous issues can be found there. And if you are aware of any outreach opportunities, please share them with me at any time, and we'll do our best to try and get in them. That's all I have. Any questions?
All right. Any questions for Steve? And I will appreciate, just on a personal note, you know, when Steve and Hemant kind of take the reins on these things, like that Federation board meeting, I mean, they knock that out, and it makes my life so much easier not to have to deal with that stuff. But man, they make us all look really good when they do that stuff, and we really appreciate that. That's a big help, man.
No problem. Our pleasure.
Go ahead,
Dr.
sir.
Motley, question. Steve, well, I just wanted to make sure that we had a rephrasing of the CME requirements this time. My understanding is that we can have up to 80% of our CME online. Of the 50 hours, we can have up to 40 hours, if my understanding is correct, but we are still required to have at least 10 hours in person for CME. Can you correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of that?
So right now, the whole the term live interactive, so you could have, I think, up to half of your continuing medical education in a recorded online, or the 10 to 20 hours of that. So that can be a recorded format, like a webinar. But the CME, the live interactive webinar, counts as an in-person a webinar where you, like this would be a CME course. Could be, you know, where you can raise your hand and you're interacting with the teacher, the person presenting. And so that was approved by the Council of Podiatric Medical Education last fall, even before COVID. And so we went and reviewed all of that and made clear so that TPMA, Texas Podiatric Medical Association, could present their conference all online as a live interactive event, and it would count for your CME.
Thank you for clarifying that.
All right. Anything else for Steve? This is a good clarification, Dr. Martin. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was agenda item G5, G6, Executive Office. Ms. Winston.
Good morning, board members. Mary Winston, TDLR. I'm going to be giving the executive report this morning. After you guys meeting in March, everything changed. So you were one of the last in-person public meetings that we held, and then we became remote. I want to begin by talking about TDLR's COVID-19 response, and we still have our webpage up, and it's entitled TDLR Takes Action in Response to COVID-19 Threat. Our responses have been both internal and external. Externally, We have acted as a conduit of information in our website, sending out notices to those who subscribe to our emails, relaying information that becomes available from our state health services, from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and from our Office of the Governor. On this page, you'll find links to Governor Abbott's executive orders, and those who sign up for emails, again, are receiving emails related to changes that started to go out on May 1st. Internally, TDLR has really shown its core values in, hard at work. We stopped, dropped, and rolled. I know that Steve Eaker said working from home. I know that Laura said, we were transported to home. Everything went to remote. How did that happen? From folks where you have hundreds of people coming into the office every day. I'm just going to brag on our IT department. They made it happen. And our executive staff for giving the go ahead and the directions to make it happen. Those who did not have laptops to work remotely were either given laptops out of they may have been older laptops, but something to work with, or their desktops were transported to a remote location and software was purchased to make sure that they could connect to the office. I just want to give that kudos because sometimes we think things can't happen fast because we have so many processes to go through. And in the case of an emergency or something that's a dire need, which is continuing to serve Texans when we have to be socially distant, we worked it out. It hasn't been without internal and some very personal disruptions. We've seen staff members who have been personally ill and who've had family members who have been ill. We have temporarily closed different offices or floors that required deep cleaning because of possible contamination. But we've really seen a tremendous spirit in the agency, and with our workflow, we've accommodated and we continue to move forward in our work. Next, I want to talk about our strategic plan and just kind of give you an update. As you know, our next legislative session is upon us. It happens next month, and it meets every 2 years, odd number years. So in the even number years, we submit two things as a state agency: the strategic plan, and then our LAR, our legislative appropriations request, a few months later. The strategic plan is somewhat of an introduction to the agency. So on our website, you'll find a copy of it. It's who we are, what we do, what our goals and priorities are, and the challenges that we face on the horizon for the next several years. Historically, this is the time that TDLR hits the road. I've been from Lubbock to El Paso, where we and all points in between, because we typically break up into teams and book public meeting areas, and we send out mass emails saying, please come and tell us what we do well, what we can do better. If you were king or queen for a day, what law, rules, what would you change if you could? Process. Historically, that's what we do. Well, couldn't do that this year. Typically starts in March. So what we did online surveys. We did meetings such as this to get input. We really worked hard to still continue to let our licensees as well as the public provide input into the strategic plan moving forward. And we developed some agency goals. We want to fully implement and administer recommendations that resulted from the Sunset Review, which I'll discuss quite shortly. We wanted to remove redundancies, eliminate bottlenecks. How can we do things better, streamline things, and just be better for the citizens of Texas? And we talked about focusing on protecting health and safety, combating human traffic, and preventing consumer harm. Also, a part of the plan was our response to natural disaster, pandemic, or crisis. We still continue to streamline and improve administration, and this is what we do with the input from everyone outside of the agency, as well as input from within the agency. The LAR, Legislative Appropriations Request. Following the strategic plan is when we ask for money. What do we need to get to accomplish these goals? And we break that out. That also is on our website, and it's broken out succinctly into what line items are needed to take care of what things the agency needs to progress. We've talked about the new Texas licensing system. We were operating under 9 disparate different licensing systems that came about because we call our historical legacy programs, those we've had for a while. Well, they had somewhat older technology that they operated on. And then we would get a newer program, such as Podiatry, who had its own program. We did not, one size in technology doesn't fit all. So what we did is we just coordinated into a new system. And so we have folks trained on each system to deal with different licensing things and different things that come up. What we're doing now, our legislative appropriation requests, which was granted last session for the first stage, was to get one licensing system to line up all of the 9 disparate systems that we currently operate under. This will increase efficiency. Now, the Sunset Commission staff report. TDLR has been under limited review by the Sunset staff. This morning, we have a hearing. We're actually in the middle of a hearing. Hemant and I were listening to the hearing before this meeting started, but we had to kind of multitask and toggle over to your meeting because first things first. At this public meeting, which is a little modified because of where we are with social distance requirements, but we have our executive director, Mr. Brian Francis, as well as our commissioner, Mr. Rick Figueroa, giving testimony this morning. The Sunset report, public comments, and our agency's response, all of these things are on the Sunset Commission's website for your review, and we will know more once we complete the public hearing today. It's not over after that. So now the staff has made the report. The agency, TDLR, has given a response. Well, now the full commission is going to hear what's going on, and we're going to be allowed to speak this morning. Following that, there will be a decision hearing by the Sunset Commission, and any statutory changes recommended be adopted by Sunset and incorporated into a bill, which will be filed in the session coming up, and the bill would have to make it through to be passed. So we're still in the middle of this process. If you have made public comments, they're still available on the website, and you can make public comments even today as we have the public meeting. In the meantime, we're continuing to focus on implementing our management actions. And one thing about Sunset, it's a deep dive into the agency, but we have always felt that it makes us better. We had numerous meetings. We had a lot of things that we looked at that we may not have looked at in a while because we get new programs and we do new things. And it just definitely makes us a better agency. Finally, I want to look at our communication outreach statistics. Delia's going to share that. This is our informal look. I say informal because we don't have a professional looking to make certain judgments on what this is. It's the facts. Over the past 6 months, how has the podiatry website held out? How many times has it been viewed? Looks like almost 100 times per day. And then we want to know what percentage were viewed from where. This kind of helps us know if we are up with the current technology on how the public searches. So far, your industry searches more from a desktop computer, 16% smartphone, 2% from tablet. That varies depending on which program we have, but it gives us an idea of how our licensees and the public reach out to us. The top reasons for visiting the site: primary source verification, podiatry forums, frequently asked questions, the podiatry administrative rules, and the advisory board. So that kind of gives us an idea of what's important, which way we should go. Our webmaster keeps track of this, as well as our public information officer and our Office of Strategic Communication. And it provides us direction on the things we should post and we should keep an eye on for your program. That is the end of my report. If anyone has any questions, I will be happy to try to answer them.
Okay. Any questions, comments, clarifications for Ms. Winston? Oh, that's A+, no question.
They're ready to get to the meat of the meeting. Oh, Dr. Martin has his hand up.
I don't have a question. I just appreciate all you're doing for us. Thank you for your service.
We love this program. I mean, we work so hard. We had a comment, and I don't want to make this meeting run over, but we literally had a comment the other day that, read by, I can't brag on him enough, because this program, of course, is one that's close to his heart. And when you bring someone in who's so dedicated and you bring in such a fabulous group of folks, you're just going to work hard for them, right? As we do with all of our licensees. The comment that we had was, though we're typically working from home, we have about 25% of folks in the office because we have some things that have to be taken care of. We have money that comes in, we have to get it processed, things like that. But the majority of folks are working remotely. Sometimes we have to make ourselves put down our work, i.e. close the computer. Don't do anything else, because there's not a stopgap unless you make it. So we appreciate that comment. We really do, Dr. Martin, and we really do work to do the best.
Yeah, excellent comment, for sure, and echoed by all of us. So that was G6. Agenda item H are the work group reports. So we'll start with number 1, standard of care work group. Dr. Campbell, do you want to make any input onto that?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. And I will second or third the comment regarding Ms. Winston and all staff. They are a pleasure to work with, and we appreciate all of your efforts. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay. The standard of care work group met via correspondence in September and October of this year. The work group members include Drs. Campbell, Lunsford, and Motley. The work group reviewed and provided input on 2 major topics at this time. In September, we worked on and provided input to TDLR on staff on the billing of personal protective equipment, PPE during COVID. There were some suggestions that were made in that regard. I know that I had made some recommendations for staff. That was quite interesting, that we were given a set of information from staff, and we actually just made some embellishments, including providing and recommending certain barriers for public and protection of staff. In October, the work group provided input regarding when waivers of the requirements in Texas Health and Safety Code 481-074 and 481-075 for electronic prescribing of controlled substances should be granted by the department. The waivers are authorized by House Bill 2174 that passed during the 86th regular session. And these recommendations are being presented today as part of the proposed rule package. So, Dr. Motley, did you want to expound on any information in regard, especially to the latter comment?
No, I think to keep it clean on the agenda, the fact that to tally up letter H here, so just the reports, I think we'll leave it at that, and then leave the proposals J separate. Does that work with you, Ms. Winston? We can keep those as separate agenda
Yes,
items.
that sounds perfect, Dr. Motley.
Okay, so
Okay.
absolutely, Dr. Campbell, we will, but I want to hold that until we get to J and then let Mr. Phipps help in and guide that conversation a little bit. But as staying under H number 2, the licensing work group, especially as the one thing to highlight there, I think, was CPR requirements during COVID. Dr. Campbell, did you want to hit on any of those?
Right, we met by conference call March this past year on both Dr. Martley, Martin, and Brown, and They basically were provided information regarding in-person CPR versus virtual CPR. Obviously, we've been dramatically affected by COVID, and we wanted to ensure that any new applications that were being serviced, that those applicants would have the ability to meet that CPR requirement. The work group recommended online CPR courses for the duration of COVID-19 as an acceptable means to provide that requirement for the initial applications. And the recommendation by the group was provided to Brian Francis, our executive director. The waiver of in-person CPR requirements on initial application was granted by him. The waiver has allowed TDLR to continue processing the applications as noted, received online by our applicants, and will continue throughout the duration of the COVID-19 period. Thank you.
Perfect. Any comments or clarifications on letter H? If not, we'll go to I. Steve, you want to help us out? Discussion and possible action on recommendation department regarding license requirements during the pandemic.
Sure, we have to. Steve Eaker, TDLR. Thanks again for being here. So we want to run by you 2 topics for consideration related to licensing that we want the larger board to discuss. The first has to do with the temporary waiver of part of the podiatric exam sequence in response to COVID. First, I want to give a little background on the test sequence. The American Podiatric Medical License Exam, the APMLE, is administered and overseen by the National Board of Podiatric Examiners, the NBPE. There are 3 parts to this exam, 2 of which are taken around graduation from a school of podiatric medicine. So part 1 and part 2 is taken before the first year of residency and ascertain if a student is ready to practice supervised within a residency program. And then part 2 has 2 parts, a written and a in-person clinical one called the Clinical Skills Patient Encounter, or CSP. And this is designed to see if the student has the clinical knowledge and social skills and other je ne sais quoi, the other skills needed to enter residency. And then part 3 of the exam is taken before graduation from residency and ascertains if they're ready to kind of be practiced unsupervised to be released into the wild. So what we want the advisory board to consider is the effect of COVID for part 2, the clinical, the in-person clinical aspect of the tests. Specifically, part 2 is an in-person skills assessment. And so this part of the exam sequence became a little further background. It became a requirement recently in 2015, and even since then has had a 1-year exception. This test is only administered in 1 town in Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania right now has a 14-day quarantine on anybody coming to Pennsylvania. So flying and staying there is a risk to the student there and the people administering to the exam and just the general population. So MPB, the board who maintain the exam, is recommending the sequence of this requirement for licensure be waived for this year. So we want the board to consider the requirement for this test for residency license, and if it's truly required for competence, to practice while supervised. We also want you to consider if it should be waived just for this year's class entirely. So currently they're allowed to take it out of sequence, and they've extended the time period because of COVID. And they extended the deadline into February, but I mean, COVID's rapidly evolving, and just as of the week before Thanksgiving, they suspended testing at the site because of COVID conditions in Pennsylvania, so they canceled the late November, early December tests. And so the MPB right now is keeping the requirement and waiving the need for the class of 2021 to take prior to taking part 3. For some other perspective, the podiatry educational program is not unique. The U.S. medical license exam for MDs, the USMLE, has several parts. One of them, called Step 2, is essentially the same thing. It's a clinical skills exam. And they have suspended this for 12 to 18 months while they figure out different ways of either virtually, they're working on a program to administer it. So MPBE would like to waive this, the test for this class, but if our state is requiring it for licensure, they're going to keep offering it. So the question is to waive this for this particular class. And Dr. Campbell, you were on some of these calls. You think I captured that?
Yep, I think you captured that very well. I mean, this has obviously been an ongoing issue. The Federation has been in touch with all of the state components, the licensing boards, and I will tell you that both Steve and Hemant have been great as far as feedback to the Federation. And there's currently a survey that's going out right now. The Federation has submitted that to all the components. I will tell you, Texas is always in the lead as far as responding to that. There are right now 13 states that are outstanding, and APMA has been trying to communicate with those folks to get that information. I believe there are about 5 states right now that require that test prior to actually taking their or assuming their residency program. So there's some things that's very fluid right now. It's creating some difficulty. But Steve is correct. This exam is only given in Cohoshen, Pennsylvania. And obviously because of the restrictions and the quarantining, as you know, Dr. Motley, this has been a nightmare for both clerkships and residencies, and some of your residents making sure that they are getting the work that they need, and certainly from a mentoring perspective. So I think that in this perspective, we need to be agile a bit. And I think Steve has given a good round and broad-based description of what's actually going on in the industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, I thank y'all for all your work. I know Dr. Campbell really did a lot of this heavy lifting, even though we're all listed on that work group. Do you have a recommendation, Dr. Campbell? That
I think that,
yeah,
I believe
for 21.
I believe that we should consider suspending the requirement for the CSPE clinical part 2 exam just for the year 2021. That's the graduates that are actually going to be graduating and going into their residency. So I just think it's going to be extremely difficult. Everything remains very fluid right now. Pennsylvania has a 2-week quarantine mandatory, and the center has been shut down. So I would agree with Steve that though the MBPME has projected February as a possibility of opening these exams back up again, I'm not sure that we can actually depend upon that given what has occurred with the COVID pandemic. So for ease of TDLR for residents coming into the state, and for all involved in licensees, I think we should just suspend the requirement as done in 2016, by the way. So this is not new. This was done. The CSPE came about in 2015. It was the first year that it was administered, but in 2016 it was suspended nationally. So this, again, we are not going on new territory here. This has been done historically. So from a state perspective, I would recommend we suspend that requirement for 2021.
Okay, Ms. Winston, we're good for considering that a motion with a second.
I would second Joe Martin.
Dr. Martin, second. All in favor, right hand or a hand in the camera? All right. Any opposed? Okay.
Delia, could we get a, Mary Winston, could we get a vote just so we can get everybody's names?
Yes, ma'am.
Do that, a roll call vote? Thank you.
Sirenia Terrazas.
Aye.
Yvette Hernandez.
Aye.
Nancy Carroll Wyndham.
Aye.
Dr. Renee Peach.
Aye.
Dr. Joe Martin.
Aye.
Dr. Michael Lunsford.
Aye.
Dr. Leslie Campbell.
Aye.
And Dr. Travis Motley.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Campbell, not to make you do all the heavy lifting around here. I assume recommendations for in-person CPR course would probably mirror those recommendations. I mean, anytime you show up at a hospital from a residency perspective, at least, you're going to get that shoved down your throat anyway when lasers
Correct.
are off. If you show up with a piece of paper that says you took it, it really doesn't make any difference in our hospital. So you
Right.
did so far.
Yeah, we had a discussion about, him and I actually discussed this, and I think that by the time you matriculate into a residency program, you are very well adept at CPR, and we all know about any, which is, by the way, the anatomical model we all use. So I would agree that we certainly need to fall in that same line as well with the CPR. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll take that as a motion based on recommendations of Dr. Campbell to defer the 2021 class in-person CPR course. And I'll take a second on that.
I'll second that one.
Dr. Lunsford, second. And then you want to do a roll call vote again, Delia, please?
Yes, sir. Sirenia Terrazas,
Aye.
Yvette Hernandez,
Aye.
Nancy Carroll Winton,
Aye.
Dr. Renee Peach,
Aye.
Dr. Joe Martin,
Aye.
Dr. Michael Lunsford,
Aye.
Dr. Leslie Campbell,
Aye.
and Dr. Travis Motley.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank
Okay.
you.
For everybody's work on that, I mean, Steve and him and Dr. Campbell, I mean, Dr. Campbell's probably done, you know, all the lifting on that. So thanks for doing that, Leslie, a lot. And then to loop in what Dr. Campbell was talking about earlier too, that was to close, that was closing agenda item I. As we go to J, that was really what Dr. Campbell was going with earlier about controlled substances and House Bill 2174. So it's 130.59, 130.74. And we can, I think Dr. Campbell already introduced it quite well, but we can, any addition by Mr. Phipps or Hammett?
Well,
Any
sure, board
rebuttal on
members.
that?
Let me give a brief overview, and I know some of this may be duplicative for those of you who are practitioners. We do have some public members who may need a little more background on this, so I'll go into some detail, and I apologize for any of this that may be duplicative. But board members, as you know, in this state, as of January 1st, 2021, there will be a requirement for all controlled substances to be issued electronically. There are some exceptions to that requirement, and that comes from the Texas Health and Safety Code, Chapter 481. And we have already incorporated the exceptions to that requirement in our existing rule. And you guys did that in your last rulemaking package. That was a result of House Bill 2174, the 86th legislative session. But we do have one remaining portion of this that the board needs to act on, and that is the waiver requirement. So instead of an exception to the electronic prescriptions for specific circumstances that may fall under those things outlined in our rule, the waiver grants a blanket waiver from this requirement for 1 year. And the provisions of this waiver are up to the agency to adopt under the Health and Safety Code's requirements. However, we did work with a interagency work group that was convened by the Pharmacy Board, and we are adopting our rules after considering the outline of the rules that the Pharmacy Board adopted, and they very recently adopted those rules. They will be published in the December 11th issue of the Texas Register. So we have considered those in our rulemaking. And the rule that we're putting forward for you today contains the process for requesting a waiver, outlines how long the waiver will be in effect, which is 1 year, and outlines how a practitioner can apply for a renewal of that waiver. Additionally, this rule will outline the different criteria that the department will apply when considering whether or not to grant that waiver. And finally, the rule will outline disciplinary authority to revoke or refuse that waiver if the practitioner violates the laws and rules applicable to a practitioner regulated by this agency. So that is the background for this rule structure. And then let me describe a little more about what we're actually doing in this rulemaking. what we've done here is we've put together a rule that contains the criteria outlined first by the Texas Health and Safety Code, Chapter 481, and additionally expanded by the rule adopted by the Pharmacy Board. So we've considered those two elements, we've placed them into our rule, and the goal of this rule is to outline how the department will consider these and grant these as we receive them. So the department will be receiving these applications on a form promulgated by the department. They will not be bringing each one of these to you as a board. They'll be considered by the department specifically. So this is your opportunity to review the criteria and explain what may need to be included in this rulemaking to make sure that we are issuing these waivers appropriately and making sure that we protect the people of Texas by limiting these controlled substance prescriptions in a written format. And I'm happy to walk you through the specific requirements of this rule. We can discuss any portions that you may have a question about. But just to emphasize one more time, this is controlled substance prescriptions, and these are practitioners who have been granted a waiver. So this is not a prescription for a dangerous drug. Those are two different classes of prescription drugs here in the state of Texas. So we're talking about Schedule 2 through Schedule 5 controlled substances only that would be subject to this electronic prescribing requirement, and also the waiver that would be issued under this rule. So with that, any questions you may have or anything I can expound on that might help you in the review of this rule, happy to address those.
Yeah, I think you pointed out the important parts, and I assume everyone's had time to look over that. But it's basically, you know, voting for a recommendation is what our vote would be for today, if I'm correct, and that would be repealing 130.74 and then going with 130.59.
Sorry, Dr. Motley, actually that is the next rule that we have in this package. So I'm talking about the amendment to 130.59 right now.
Right here.
I'm sorry.
No.
And I will discuss that as well. I wanted to make sure that we covered 130.59 first. 130.59 is an existing rule. 130.59 is already in place and already contains the exceptions to the electronic prescribing requirement that I mentioned earlier. The addition of the waiver portion is what we have before you today. So that would be an additional those are subsections E, F, that would be subsection D, E, and F, excuse me, as well as an amendment to subsection C8. And I can walk through those changes, but we are not repealing 130.59. 130.59 is going to remain in place, just the amendment.
Okay. Right, I read that wrong. So what I was doing, you're doing it obviously in the correct order. My mentality was get rid of the old first and then put the new in there, but apparently.
And I'm happy to move to that, to the discussion of matrix. If anyone has questions about 130.59. I knew that one was the more complicated of the two. So.
Yeah. Any questions for Mr. Phipps or Hammond on the 130.59, especially D, the waivers, D and D through F, the waiver sections?
It sounds like there's no questions about that. Oh, sorry.
No, that's me. I muddied the waters, man. My bad.
I'll move on to the next portion of this rulemaking. So this will be the repeal of our penalty matrix rule. And that is the section that Dr. Motley mentioned, the repeal of 130.74, the penalty matrix rule. So let me be clear on the outset of this. This is the repeal of the rule that refers to our penalty matrix. This is not a repeal of the existence of a penalty matrix. As was mentioned earlier, I believe in the discussion with the Enforcement Division, we have a penalty matrix for this program, the podiatry program, and it is a portion of the larger enforcement plan that TDLR uses to appropriately recommend sanctions for different violations. So you can think of the enforcement plan as the large overarching document that guides enforcement at this agency. Each program has a penalty matrix. Each program is adopting a penalty matrix after consultation with the advisory board. That is adopted by the commission and published in the Texas Register. It is not published as a rule though. So let me be clear on that. Other divisions or other programs do not use a rule-based penalty matrix. The podiatry program is a little unique because there was a statutory requirement for that penalty matrix to be adopted into a rule, which adds an additional layer of complication and follows the procedures of the APA that we discussed earlier today in that open government presentation. So it's a cumbersome process. It takes a long time. It's multiple steps, and it is not a very agile, responsive process for a penalty matrix. Since the requirement to adopt this penalty matrix into rule was repealed in the last legislative session, we are now bringing this recommendation to you to repeal the penalty matrix rule. And so I'll say one more time, we are not repealing the existence of the penalty matrix for this program. We are simply responding to the repeal of Texas Occupations Code 202.6011 in House Bill 2847. Since that requirement was repealed, we feel it would be more appropriate to treat this program like all the other TDLR programs that follow the same procedures and treat their penalty matrix as the same document that is handled by the Enforcement Division for all the other programs. And if you have any questions about how that looks or how those are handled in other programs, I'm sure we could get someone from the Enforcement Division to specifically describe that to you. But again, repealing this rule will not eliminate the existence of the penalty matrix. It will simply allow us to treat the penalty matrix for the podiatry program like all of the other programs here at TDLR. So I know I said a lot there. If there's any questions about that, happy to try and address those as well. Or if you have any questions about the text of that repeal, I'm happy to address those.
I have a question about procedure in regard to using the matrix, what we have in place now and what you're talking about. Would there be any difference in procedures going forward in enforcement with if we repeal this matrix?
So Dr. Martin, again, our Enforcement Division could speak to this more specifically if they want to. I don't know if we have anyone left on the meeting, but my understanding is that this will not change the approach at all. They will still be applying the matrix in the same way, and they will still be citing the matrix and the sections of the matrix that apply in exactly the same way. Effectively, the document will not change. So in terms of practice, it should not change anything at all. The only change will be if there needs to be future change, addition, subtraction to that matrix, the time period for changing will be much quicker because they will bring it to you once at a meeting, discuss it with you and get your input, and then take that to the commission once and have that approved. Instead of having publication in the register for comment, bringing that back to you again for discussion of the comments, taking that to the commission, and then publishing it as adopted rule. So you could look at that saving months and months of time and effort in terms of changing it in the future. But in terms of using the document in an enforcement case, going to SOA and citing that in an enforcement case before an ALJ, it should be treated exactly the same.
Mary Winston, TDLR, and thank you, Alex. Perfect delivery, actually. We did lose the person from connectivity issues from enforcement, but yes, we will continue exactly the same as we're operating now. This will just allow us to be a little lighter on our feet when changes need to occur, because it will come to the advisory board. You speak for your industry. And your recommendations would then go to the commission versus having to go through a rules process, which takes a certain amount of time to post, a certain amount of time to have public comment, a certain amount of time to then come back to you a couple of times, and a certain amount of time to then post as a new rule that can be followed. It just doesn't have those constraints and allows us to be a little more, a little quicker on our feet if changes do need to occur. But nothing is changing by the way that we currently act. It just means that we won't have to go through those hoops when changes do need to occur. Your hands won't be tied.
So I hate to drag this out, but let me just make sure I understand the changes that you just discussed. And I understand the desire to make this process move quicker. But from my understanding is if we go this route, we eliminate any public comment on the changes.
So we would eliminate the public comment period required by the Administrative Procedure Act, which
Okay.
is specified in the rulemaking procedure. But that would not prevent someone from commenting at a meeting about the content of the enforcement plan, any issues they had with the penalty matrix or any other part of our enforcement process here at TDLR. So you're trading formalized 30-day comment period for the normal sort of public comment that we gather every day at every meeting. It would not totally eliminate the opportunity for public comment. And Mary Winston may have more to offer on that.
Yeah, just to second that, just as when we post things for the penalty matrix and we provide, of course, the board that information, and then we come to this public meeting if we're virtual or face-to-face or whatever, and that information is put out to the public as well as the agenda, and they have a right to come and actually give in-person comment, send in written comment. The public comment period in a more formalized way is very formal. You have to submit public comment, which is great. You know, it's the Texas way, but you submit a written public comment through the register, and then that is considered, and that's brought back by Alex. The way it would go without such a formalized rule process, the public commenter could present their own public comment directly to the advisory board.
Does that offer your clarification, Dr. Martin?
Yeah, I think I have an understanding of the process. Thank you for helping with that. Thank you.
Anyone else, questions or concerns? So to keep this a little cleaner than the way I introduced it, can we divide these up, if that's okay with you, Ms. Winston, into both the waivers D through F on 130.59 first?
That I think you'd like that, wouldn't you, Alex?
Sure, you can
would be
make
cleaner.
a motion to that. Yeah, I would just say that obviously there are changes to an earlier section, subsection C8 as well. So let's just mention the changes to 130.59.
Correct.
generally.
Yeah. So I'll take a motion to approve that recommendation. A hand, and then we'll do the roll call. So Ms. Wyndham and then Dr. Peach is a second. And then all in favor, we could do a roll call vote, Delia, if that makes it easier.
Yes, thank you. Sirenia Hernandez Terrazas.
Aye.
Yvette Hernandez.
Aye.
Nancy Carroll Wyndham.
Aye.
Peach.
Aye.
Dr. Joe Martin.
Aye.
Dr. Michael Lunsford.
Aye.
Dr. Leslie Campbell.
Aye.
And Dr. Travis Motley.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. And then carrying on with agenda item J, with a repeal to clean this out of 130.74. Is that correct, Mr. Phipps?
Yes, it would be the repeal of 130.74.
Okay. We'll take a motion. And we'll do that. Okay, Dr. Lunsford, second, Dr. Campbell. And then Delia, can we roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Sirenia Terrazas.
Aye.
Yvette Hernandez.
Aye.
Nancy Carroll Wyndham.
Aye.
Dr. Renee Peach.
Aye.
Dr. Joe Martin.
Aye.
Dr. Michael Lunsford.
Aye.
Dr. Leslie Campbell.
Aye.
And Dr. Travis Motley.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, thank you, everyone. And thanks for keeping us on track. That's easy, Mr. Phipps. I kind of muddied that one up right out of the gate. So sorry, made your job harder than it needed to be.
It's always so confusing when you're doing a repeal and an amendment. So thank you very much, board members.
Yeah. Agenda item K, review, discussion, and possible action to appoint members to work groups. I'll tell you the way I'll do it. And so for our public members, we have 4 work groups that we utilize for different things, like you've heard in reports today. So it's basically enforcement. That's one work group. Licensing is another. Education and examination is another. And then standard of care work groups. So out of those work groups, we like to plug in a public member for that, because it helps us tremendously to have another point of view on those things. And rather than assign them, I didn't know if anyone had a particular interest in any of those that may fit either what you're more interested in, or if you want to rock, paper, scissors, we can do whatever modality you think is best.
Chair, I do not have a preference. You can make that assignment, so we can do rock, paper, scissors, whatever's left, or where you would like for me to serve. That would be fine.
Well, that's very nice, but you're not very good at the first rule of meetings, which is number 1, always stay quiet, and then you never get assigned to anything. Or my old chairman, he's never sat to his left in a meeting, because he always said that and then looked to his left. And if I ever got stuck in that chair, I always got stuck with extra work. So let's do this. And thanks for kind of volunteering, which will turn into voluntold here pretty quick. So let's put Ms. Wyndham in enforcement. And I'll tell you, I don't know, Delia, we don't have to fill all 4 of these, correct?
Ms. Winston, I'll let you answer that.
You do not. You do not. If you're comfortable with 3, that's fine. We just don't want to overwhelm anyone, but
That's all right.
this is your party and you can make that decision, Chairman.
Well, I'll do them in the order that I think hopefully someone would want to do. And then if anybody's in for bonus points and extra reimbursement checks, we'll let them go, education and examination. But the licensing requirements, that licensing work group, I think is really, it helps. This is a big one too for public members, because it helps us kind of get away from our kind of our hardwired area of test taking and stuff and get a better picture. So that leaves Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Rosas for licensing. Oh,
I'll take licensing if it's okay.
yes, absolutely. Thank you. All right. And then standard of care, Mr. Rosas, I'm going to put you there. Is that okay with you?
That sounds great.
Okay. And then bonus, or no one, don't feel like you have to fill this slot. This is the education and examination work group. I'm perfectly fine leaving that open unless someone really has really wants to do that. It would be appreciated either way. I just didn't want to get new public members and give you a bunch of stuff you didn't want to do in the first place. So it's up to you. I'm perfectly fine leaving it on. Crickets, awkward silence, no volunteer. We'll leave it open and we'll touch if someone wants to switch. We can always switch work groups. These are not hard and fast groups. Something doesn't work, or if you don't like working with me, we'll put you with Dr. Campbell. She's much nicer, and then we'll do things along. So thank you very much for doing that. Any recommendation? That was agenda item K. We're going to move to L. Any recommendations for our agenda items for next board meeting? Having heard none, we will get to M, date and time, location. Generally, the way we do that is we'll kind of send out some emails and poll everyone. It used to be a bigger pain if we all had to drive to Austin, but this way is probably a lot more flexible. I will tell you that for planning, when we send out emails for planning, these meetings routinely run about an hour. It takes a little bit longer the first time we get new people on the board because we have to do some board member training and things like that. But traditionally, we're lucky and we keep it about an hour. And the way we do that is everyone gets their packets, everyone has read their packets, everyone knows the data and the subject matter. And then, of course, we're very lucky with all the TDLR staff, our institutional knowledge, like Steve and Hemant and Mary and all these people that are with us on a daily basis. And then Delia keeps us all straight with all those things. So that's the whole reason we're able to have these meetings in an hour. So it's not by accident, it's by work. So let's keep doing that. But that will that's the way we'll figure out our next board meeting date is an email poll